I was 7 months along when my world completely collapsed. My husband, Michael Carter, had been in a terrible accident that left him in a coma, and instead of standing beside me, his family turned their backs. They blamed me for everything, stripped me of every bit of security I had, and shoved me out with nothing but a run-down, half-roofed house to my name. They mocked me as I left, laughing like I was already finished. But inside that wreck of a place, I uncovered something no one else knew, something Michael had kept hidden long before the accident. That secret gave me the strength to fight for him, protect my unborn child, and take back the future his family tried to steal from me. The night it all began, rain hammered against the hospital windows in Chicago, beating a rhythm that never seemed to end. I sat in the waiting room with my belly pressing tight against the thin fabric of my dress. At 7 months pregnant, I was sore all over, but none of that pain compared to the weight crushing my chest. Behind those heavy doors, Michael lay still, silent, and unreachable. A car accident had stolen him from my side and locked him in a coma the doctors weren't sure he'd ever wake from. I pressed my hands together and whispered into the cold air, "Please, Michael. Please come back to us." That's when I heard the sharp click of shoes on the floor. I looked up and saw his family standing there. His mother's voice cut through me like a knife. "You've ruined this family. Look at him. He's like this because of you." My throat closed up. I wanted to defend myself, but the words wouldn't come. One of his brothers muttered, shaking his head, "She never should have been here. Never should have married him." They hadn't come to comfort me, they came to bury me. Within a week, they shoved paperwork in my face, property deeds, accounts, every asset Michael owned. They stripped it all away, claiming it was family rights. To them, he was already as good as dead, and I was nothing. Even the neighbors whispered. One night in the hospital cafeteria, I overheard two women. "She's the wife, right?" one said. "The black woman," the other replied. "Yeah. They say she's the reason he crashed. Probably fighting in the car." I stood frozen, my coffee cup crumpling in my hand as the watery liquid spilled over my fingers. By the time the storm outside finally cleared, everything had been ripped from me, except the child growing inside my belly. Then came the final blow. One morning, a cousin tossed a set of rusted keys at me with a smirk. "Since you want something, here." He had some old unfinished house on the edge of town. "Not worth more than $1,000. Go live there." Their laughter followed me out of that big house like a pack of wild dogs. I clutched my stomach with one hand and the keys with the other, stepping into a future I never asked for. When I reached the place, my heart sank. The so-called house was barely standing. Bricks crumbled, parts of the roof were missing, and the boards were soft with rot. Grass sprouted through cracks in the floor, and the wind howled through the empty rooms like ghosts. I stood there in the mud, my dress plastered to my body from the rain, my swollen feet sinking into the earth. My eyes burned, but no tears would fall. Finally, I steadied my breath and whispered to myself, "If this is what they left me with, then this is where I'll start." Their cruel laughter still echoed in my head, but underneath it, something else was stirring, a quiet flame I couldn't ignore. That broken house became my only refuge. At night, the wind rattled the half-roof, chilling me to the bone beneath a thin blanket. When it rained, water ran down the walls and pooled on the floor, and I'd drag my mattress into the driest corner. Sometimes, I woke to dogs howling outside and shadows shifting in the cracks of the boards. Every day blurred into the next. I got up before the sun, tied a scarf around my hair, and pulled on the same worn-out shoes to face another day of survival. I took whatever work I could find just to scrape by. I scrubbed floors in other people's houses, washed strangers' laundry, and sometimes cooked in little diners where the smell of grease and smoke clung to me long after I left. Every step got harder as my belly grew heavier, but I didn't dare stop. Every dollar I made went toward a bus ride and a cheap meal, split between me and the hours I spent at the hospital. That hospital became my second home. I sat beside Michael's bed day after day, whispering to him even when he never stirred. I fixed the thin blanket around his shoulders, straightened the tubes, and pressed his hand against my stomach, praying he might feel the baby moving inside me. The nurses would glance at me as they walked by, sometimes with pity, sometimes with quiet judgment, and the gossip never seemed to end. One afternoon, while I was standing in line at the hospital cafeteria with nothing more than a tray of plain rice, I overheard two men behind me. "Poor thing, living in that busted-up place," one said. "Yeah," the other replied. "But you know his family. They say she ruined him. Maybe she got what she deserved." I clenched my jaw, forcing myself not to turn around. Instead, I carried my tray to a corner table and chewed slowly, like every bite might help me swallow down their words. But nothing cut deeper than what happened next. One evening, the doctor pulled me aside into his office. His face carried the kind of weight that made my stomach twist. He leaned back against his desk, sighed, and finally spoke. "Listen. Michael's family came to me. They think it'd be better to let him go. They say keeping him alive is cruel, that maybe the kinder thing would be to end it quietly." The air rushed out of my lungs. I gripped the edge of his desk so hard my knuckles turned white. "What?" I whispered. "They call it mercy," the doctor muttered, eyes dropping to the floor. "But I couldn't make that call. I had to tell you." I staggered back, one hand on my swollen belly, the other pressed to my chest. My knees nearly gave out as those words ran circles in my head, "End him quietly." As if his life belonged to them. As if my love, my fight, my baby's father was disposable. I walked out without another word. The hallway spun around me, and by the time I reached the bus stop, my face was wet, not from the drizzle, but from tears I hadn't even noticed spilling. I pulled my scarf tighter and whispered into the dark night, "They want you gone, Michael, but I swear I won't let them win." Days turned into weeks. My belly grew heavier, my steps slower, but I kept moving. I worked, I prayed, and every evening I returned to that half-roofed shack that reminded me more of exile than home. Then one afternoon, while I was sweeping dust from the floor to clear a spot where I hoped to build a crib, my broom caught on something uneven. The sound was different, a hollow thud instead of solid wood. I stopped, frowning, then knelt down carefully, easing my belly out of the way. My fingertips traced the cracked board, and when I tapped it again, thunk, I knew something was beneath it. My breath quickened. With effort, I pried at the edge, splinters digging into my nails until the wood gave way. Wedged deep in the foundation was a metal box, rusted but still locked shut. My heart pounded as I pulled it free, dust covering my hands. For a moment I just stared, not sure if I wanted to laugh or cry. The hinges squealed in protest as I forced it open. Inside, everything changed. Stacks of cash, gold jewelry wrapped in old cloth, envelopes thick with deeds, account statements, contracts, all in Michael's name. All real. My hands shook so hard I almost dropped them. I pressed the back of my hand against my mouth to muffle the sob clawing its way out. "Oh my God. Michael, you left this." I sat there on the dusty floor, the wind whistling through the broken roof, holding that box against my belly like it was another child. The paper smelled faintly of old leather and ink, proof that Michael had safeguarded something long before the accident. For the first time in months, a spark of hope cut through the darkness. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe this was the start of something new. I wiped my tears, carefully tucked the documents back into the box, and whispered, "They thought they buried us, Michael. But they don't know, we were planted." And I didn't waste another second. The next morning, I carried the documents to a small law office squeezed between a tailor shop and a bakery downtown. The lawyer pushed his glasses up, scanning each page one by one. When he finally looked up at me, his eyebrows were raised. "These are legitimate. Very legitimate. Whoever hid them wanted to make sure they stayed safe." I nodded, one hand resting on my belly. He was protecting something. And now I need to use it. Piece by piece, I sold off the jewelry, never too much at once, never loud enough for Michael's family to hear about it. With the first bundle of cash, I walked into the hospital and cleared every debt in his name. The receptionist blinked at me, shocked. "All of it?" she asked. I just slid the envelope across the counter and said nothing. From then on, no one at the hospital questioned me. I was Michael's voice, his guardian, his shield. Back at the half-roofed house, something inside me shifted. I scrubbed the floors, patched holes with whatever wood I could find, and hung a thin curtain by the window. It was still broken, but it no longer felt like a ruin. It felt like a base camp. The weeks turned into months, and my body finally gave in to its countdown. At dawn, after hours of silent labor, I held my newborn daughter in my arms. Tiny, fragile, with her father's nose. Tears spilled onto her cheeks as I whispered, "He's waiting for you, little one. We'll bring him back." Balancing motherhood with my hospital visits nearly broke me. I strapped my daughter against my chest and walked those long halls, humming songs while I sat beside Michael's bed. Sometimes I pressed her tiny hand around his fingers and whispered, "She's here. She's real. They'll leave us now." The nurses still gossiped as they passed. "Isn't that the wife?" "Yeah. She's still coming every day. Poor thing. Doesn't she know he's gone for good? She's wasting her life." I heard them, but instead of flinching, I kissed my daughter's forehead, straightened her blanket, and kept talking softly to Michael. Then a year slipped by. My baby was walking now, her laughter bouncing off the sterile walls as she toddled around her father's bed. I bent to catch her when I froze. Michael's fingers twitched. The machines beeped louder. His eyelids fluttered. A faint sound broke from his throat. My heart slammed in my chest as I dropped to my knees beside him, clutching his hand. "Michael, it's me. It's us. Come back." For the first time in what felt like forever, his eyes opened. Slow. Painful. But open. Our daughter squealed with joy, climbing onto the bed as if she already knew. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't carrying this fight alone anymore. Recovery was brutal. After lying still for so long, every step for Michael was like dragging chains. But I was there through every stumble, every shaky stretch, every moment when frustration almost broke him. I fed him, coached him, and when his anger boiled over, I cupped his face in my hands and whispered, one step at a time. "You're not alone." Weeks passed. Then months. Little by little, strength returned, like spring pushing through after a long winter. When his voice finally steadied, I sat beside him, our daughter asleep in my lap, and told him everything. The night in the hospital when his family blamed me. The keys thrown like scraps to a beggar. The broken house. The gossip. The hunger. The doctor's warning. And finally, the hidden box. The only reason he was still alive. His jaw clenched. His fists curled against the blanket. His voice cracked as he muttered, "They wanted me dead." I nodded, tears brimming. Silence hung heavy until Michael whispered, steady but burning, "They've taken enough. Now it's my turn." When he grew strong enough, he sat with the same lawyer I had trusted. Together, they spread the documents across the desk like weapons, deeds, contracts, proof of ownership, proof of theft. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The case came together piece by piece, like bricks stacking into a wall. And when the court date finally arrived, I walked beside Michael, our daughter's small hand tucked in mine. She wore a simple white dress, her little curls bouncing as she skipped down the marble hallway. Inside the courtroom, his family sat stiff in their suits, pale as stone when they saw him walk in. For the first time in years, he wasn't a body lying silent in a hospital bed. He was standing, alive, strong, ready to fight. One testimony after another filled the air. The doctor admitted they had asked him to end Michael's life. Bank records proved money had been shifted behind my back. Witnesses told the court how I'd been mocked, cast out, humiliated. It was like the walls themselves echoed with their shame. For so long, my voice hadn't been heard. My pain had been brushed aside. But in that room, none of it could be denied. When the verdict came, everything was restored to Michael, his businesses, his properties, his accounts. The same family who once laughed in my face sat frozen now, heads bowed, sweat dripping like guilt. I held my daughter's hand tighter, standing taller than I ever had before. The crushing weight in my chest was gone, replaced with something I hadn't felt in years, freedom. The gates of the mansion, once guarded like enemy territory, opened smoothly as we drove through. Our daughter laughed in the back seat, her joy bouncing off the windows. For the first time, the place didn't feel hostile. It was ours again. But peace never comes without a test. Just days later, a heavy knock echoed against the wooden doors. I opened it with my daughter tugging at my dress. On the porch stood the same faces that once spat on my name, the mother-in-law who cursed me, the brothers who mocked my swollen belly, the cousins who tossed me keys to a ruin. Their eyes were wet now, their voices trembling. "We were wrong," one stammered. "Please, forgive us." I stood there, my daughter's warm little hand wrapped in mine. Behind me, Michael stepped forward. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just looked each of them in the eye, then closed the door with a steady hand. Silence. I sank into the sofa, sunlight pouring across the polished floors. Our daughter toddled across the room, giggling as she chased a ball. Michael sat beside me, our fingers intertwining. We didn't need revenge. The silence was enough. The same door they once slammed in my face had now been shut in theirs. From a half-roofed shack worth barely $1,000, to this home filled with love and justice, I carried every scar of the journey inside me. But those scars had made me unbreakable. I looked at Michael, then at our daughter, and whispered to myself, what they meant to destroy only made us whole. And so, the same family who laughed while casting me aside were left standing outside, begging at the very door they once locked against me. But we didn't need revenge. Because justice had already been served.